Thank you for joining us today as we discuss the transition from study away to returning home and staying connected to your host community. We'll be talking about reentry in general, but also some specific considerations in the time of COVID-19. First, we'd like to take a moment to introduce ourselves. My name is Janna Behrens. I am the Director of the Office of Global Education.
And my name is Chelsi Colleton, and I'm the Assistant Director of Global Education.
Hi, I'm Esther. I'm the Outreach Intern, and I studied abroad in Seoul, South Korea, and Siena, Italy.
I'm Uga Nam, and I'm the Communications and Social Media Intern, and I studied abroad in Denmark, Copenhagen.
So the purpose of the platform today is really to talk about a whole range of experiences that happen when you're re-entering your home culture. If students have really program-specific questions, please feel free to reach out to either Chelsi or myself.
So when we spend time in a new environment, we adjust to the norms of that location and develop a daily routine around those norms. So similarly, when you return home, there is also a readjustment period, especially if your host community was significantly different. So reverse culture shock is a normal part of reentry, but it currently might be heightened due to COVID-19 and the need to adapt to a new normal of everyday life. So things like social distancing, online courses, things like that. Depending on where you live, home may look significantly different than when you left and what you expected to return to. So Uga and Esther, would you be able to share some of your experiences with reverse culture shock?
Yeah, so I definitely experienced reverse culture shock upon coming back home. The biggest thing for me was that in Denmark, I lived in a big city, and things are like really accessible. They had very well-established bike lanes and public transportation. And so that just made it really easy to get around and do the things that I wanted to do. But back home, I live in the suburbs and things aren't nearly as accessible because I need to have a car to get everywhere basically. And there aren't as many bike lanes either. So I don't know, I just really limited my mobility upon coming back home, and that felt a little suffocating at first. So that was like a big thing that I had to adjust to. Another thing that I had to adjust to was kind of specific to my own home. I have a little brother, so I spent a lot of time with him, which is great. But that was like a big departure from what I was used to while I was abroad, because I was living alone and basically just operating on my own schedule. So yeah, that was a big change for me.
Yeah, I think I had very similar experiences to Uga in terms of kind of losing the autonomy that you had while being abroad. Just because I also live in a suburbia and I studied abroad in two places where as soon as you left your home, you could kind of just walk to wherever you wanted to, and it was very convenient. But I think the biggest thing for me was really language. The two places I studied abroad in, both Seoul, South Korea and Siena, Italy, there wasn't much English being used in this space. So going back home and then suddenly just being able to communicate with everyone once again was really amazing, but at the same time, just left me with a lot of concern about oh, where are these language skills that I learned? Where are they going? What's going to happen to them?
I think what's really interesting about reverse culture shock is that we expect cultural adjustment when we go on our study away experience. We know we may be learning a new language, living in a new accommodation with a host family, with new friends, in an apartment in a city. We are expecting things to be different, and we know that because of the research that we do when we're browsing programs and really talking to students who've been abroad. We have set the expectation that there will be difference. But when we come back, we're coming back to our home, to our family, our friends, our school. Things that are supposed to be really familiar with us. And yet it will take us by surprise that in fact, we are different. We've changed from being abroad and having a cultural experience. And sometimes the re-entry into your home culture, which is supposedly so familiar to you, could be a little bit bumpy. I think what's really helpful to know and to remind yourself is that you have a skill set. You studied away and you adjusted to a new academic environment, a new cultural environment, and you have a skill set there that can certainly help you as you kind of navigate the reverse culture shock landscape when you get back home.
So 2 words that you'll hear us say over and over again during this presentation are change and adaptation. They really are 2 words that relate very well to cultural adaptation, reverse culture shock, adapting back to your new home. So first, it's important to recognize that home has changed. While you were away, life went on at home. Birthdays, events at Amherst, events within your family's lives. But also, in addition to these normal events, things shifted to a new normal with social distancing, stay-at-home orders, and transitioning to online courses and work from home. There's been a lot to adjust to, and home may not feel like home right now because of the changes over the last few months, and also anticipating how things may change further over the summer and fall. But just know that these feelings are normal and they are part of reverse culture shock and adapting back to your home life.
Another piece to remember is that you have changed. You have, just by virtue of being exposed to new perspectives, new cultural norms. For those of you that have learned a new language, the structure of language makes you think differently. You learn a new way of finding humor in things. And so it's just important to note that you as a person have changed. You've also had an opportunity to be really independent, to be in charge of your own schedule, to make travel plans, to deal with ambiguity, to be flexible and be patient in ways that maybe you hadn't ever had to be flexible or patient before. So you really, to your core, have really changed as an individual.
Yeah, so that brings us to our last point. You've adapted to another culture and now you must readapt. And as Janna touched upon in the previous slide, when you're coming back home, you might not expect that you need to readapt in the first place because, home is familiar. So it might be jarring that you'd experience reverse culture shock coming back to a place that you're familiar with. But there are like strategies that you can use in coming back. One thing in particular that I did was journaling when I came back and just like writing down little things that I noticed about the States that were different than they were in Copenhagen. And that was just like a good way to get adjusted and coming back home. And just like organizing my thoughts about abroad and also like how home felt different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think also being abroad, you learn to be away from these support networks that you built up at Amherst College, these close-knit groups of friends. And that's another situation that we're kind of in right now with COVID-19. So learning that these people and these friends, peers, professors, just other figures are here to support you, and being able to reach out to them through different mediums is something that I'm learning to just practice even more now at home than maybe if I was even on campus for.
So as you process your time away, no matter how short or long that was this spring semester, we have some questions that we would like you to consider, knowing that you've changed and adapted, in order to reflect on how these questions have impacted your life back at home and in the future at Amherst. So what did you learn about yourself? And what's a skill you hope to gain or continue working on through the semester and the summer? Take about 10 seconds or so to reflect on these questions and your experience. And we'll give some examples of how these questions have worked for our own personal reflection. So for me, I studied abroad in South Africa in college, and that experience helped me to learn that I don't know everything, and that's okay. At the beginning of my semester abroad, I felt like I need to be an expert on everything about the country and the culture and social norms, but that was not realistic at all. So as the semester went on, I started to grow more comfortable asking uncomfortable questions and asking for clarification or explanations about things I didn't understand. And that's a skill that I'm still honestly practicing 9 years later, but I've definitely had a lot of practice and gotten better at it over the years.
Yeah, so one thing that I learned about myself is that for the most part at Amherst, I lived like a very structured life that was like, I had a routine every day that I stuck to. And in going abroad, I tried to like maintain a similar routine or some semblance of structure. But I realized that, you know, sometimes it's okay to depart from that structure every once in a while. And that's particularly important, you know, in times like right now, because like if you're stuck at home, it's easy to get caught up in the same routine every day. And so, you know, even little things like going outside and taking a walk could really, you know, give you perspective and help you break out of routine. So that's one thing I learned about myself. In terms of a skill that I'd want to like continue to work on, one thing that I really like took interest in while I was abroad is big data. And I took a class on big data that was like really interesting. And I continued to work on projects in that field ever since. And so I understand that you guys who are abroad may not have had as much time to like, you know, delve deep into classes, but if there's anything that you thought was interesting academically, it's important to like keep up with that.
Yeah, I think during my experience, I also really learned that I like meeting new people, that despite how much of a homebody and an introvert I can be at times, that it's really interesting to learn about other people. And to do so, sometimes you have to be uncomfortable, especially when there's a language barrier involved. And I really just learned how important language really facilitates conversation. I mean, if it wasn't obvious, just how many barriers it can break down by simply being able to speak a few words in someone else's language of comfort. And that's something that I really wanted to work on and am trying to work on continuously now, trying to maintain those language skills that I've built up and created.
And I studied abroad many, many years ago when I was in college in Italy. And then I also lived abroad when I finished college for 2.5 years. I was a high school teacher in northern Ghana in the Peace Corps. And I think one of the things that I really learned about myself is that, you know, I learned to navigate ambiguity. And it was really hard for me at first because there were so many unknowns. They were constantly changing. Like I would learn a set of cultural norms and then I felt, okay, I understand what's happening. And then I would get closer to people and there'd be a whole new set of cultural norms, or I'd encounter a new situation and a whole new set of cultural norms. So I just learned to like, you know what, there are things I am not going to know and that's going to be okay. I'm going to find out. And then a skill that I think I continue to work on is like learning to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think in my personal life and my professional life, it offers me an ability to travel, which I'm very lucky. And I do find myself in new cultural environments, which make me uncomfortable. But I am now, that is familiar to me. It's a very familiar feeling to be uncomfortable. And I think that that is something that I am very grateful to have because it's a good skill. So there are a lot of ways that you can stay connected. You know, we have a few here up on the slide to really help you think how you can stay connected to your host community. I'd like to really put a special shout out to our newsletter because we've been collecting, and Chelsi in particular has really been collecting stories from around the world about how different cultures and different people are kind of responding to building community in the time of the coronavirus. And there's no shortage of kind of virtual museum tours or virtual experiences that are being promoted. And we're trying to pick out some of the best ones and note them in the GEO newsletter. So I really encourage you to really stay connected to what's going on in your host community because I think it's a way to kind of help stretch your experience a little bit.
Yeah, I think, no, oh, go ahead, Esther, if you want to.
No, yeah, so it's really easy to kind of have small ties to your host community. As you can see some examples listed, whether it's like cooking dishes or like sharing movies and music, but at the same time, you can also just actually connect back to your host community. If you had a host family you lived with, just send them a message, maybe say hello, see how things are going on. Because I know with my host family in Italy, which was hit hard pretty early on, when I messaged them, they were really happy to hear from me. And we got to talking about like sharing recipes later on in the conversation after it was just like a simple check-in, and it gave me something else to do during quarantine days too.
Yeah, one way that I stayed connected to my host community was thinking about like the ways in which Copenhagen in particular was like sustainable, because they had a lot of bike lanes and like public transportation that encouraged sustainable transportation, and I tried to take that back home with me and trying to bike to more places, despite the relative lack of biking lanes in the suburbs. But I tried to bike more just because like it's sustainable and like leaves less of a carbon footprint. And another way in which you can stay in touch with your host community is just read about it, honestly. Like keep in touch with the news in your local country. One thing that I was following this semester was one of our bloggers, Kira, and she was in Copenhagen, and she talked a lot about sustainability as well. So I really connected with her on that.
So as we noted, take advantage of all these online resources that are surfacing to really help you stay connected. And I think stay connected to Amherst too. I mean, you've been away for quite some time now, and there's some really kind of wonderful online communities that are being built. The Religious and Spiritual Life Center is offering listening circles. There's kind of a daily wellness around noontime. You can get links to these through the Daily Mammoth. And then as always, we are really eager to kind of hear from you. In any circumstance, maybe you have a program specific question. Maybe you have a story you want to share. Maybe your family is tired of hearing your stories and you're like, but I still have more to share. Please reach out to us because we love really hearing from students. And I think I can speak for Chelsi when I say that, we've been now working remotely for some time now, and I do miss the student contact. I miss bumping into you and Val. I miss seeing you in Keefe Campus Center. So, if you want to just do a quick catch up or if you have program specific questions, please don't hesitate being in touch with us.
Absolutely. I definitely miss seeing all of you in person and hearing about your stories. That's honestly why I'm in this position, is to live vicariously through you and your experiences. So even if it's just sending us a picture on Instagram or on Facebook or something like that, we would love to keep hearing about your experiences. In the live events that we help our students on readjusting to home life after being abroad, we use the worksheet on the screen as an opportunity for students to reflect and share. Feel free to use it on your own to continue reflecting on your experience. If you would like the link to the PDF form, you can always contact us and I can definitely send that to you as well. So thank you for joining us today. Even though we're not on campus, like Janna mentioned, we'd love to hear from you, whether that's an appointment, an email, a quick Instagram shout out, whatever it is. We're looking forward to continuing to hear about your experiences over the summer and into the fall semester and beyond. So thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.